President instructs cabinet ministers keep promises made to the petroleum trade unions, quote unquote. Lohan Ratwata, Janaka Bandara and Anura Vidanagamage lose SLFP organizer positions. Pramita Bandara resigns from provincial ministerial position in protest against his father's removal from electoral organizer. Eastern Provincial Council heats up due to protests by unemployed graduates. It's the 25th of April 2017 and this is your Primetime News Bulletin. A very good evening, I'm Shred Silva.
And I'm Arundhati Mudannaika. Let's take a look at the stories in detail now. President Maithripala Sirisena presented letters of appointment today to 13 new district organisers and 4 new electorate organisers of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party.
W.M. Samarjeeva Bandara has been appointed organiser for the Paharadumbara electorate, while A.W.M. Yasamana and U.R. Dayananda Siri have been appointed co-organisers of the Dambulla electorate. K.P. Gunawardhan has been appointed organiser of the Mahayangana electorate. Lohan Ratwatte had previously served as the organiser of the Paharadumbara electorate. Janaka Bandara Tennakon previously functioned as organiser of the Dambulla electorate, while Anura Vidanagamage has been replaced as organiser of the Mahayangana electorate. New SLFP organisers for the Kandy, Mathale, Ratnapura, Jaffna and Mullaitivu districts also received their letters of appointment from President Sirisena today.
On to another story that made the headlines tonight now. Pramita Bandara Tennakoon's son of parliamentarian Janaka Bandara Tennakoon resigned from his post as a minister of the Central Provincial Council today.
According to Pramita Bandara Tennakoon, the decision to step down was taken in protest against his father being removed from the position of SLFP organizer for Dambulla. Pramita Bandara handed in his letter of resignation to Governor of the Central Province, Niluka Ekanayaka, this afternoon. He served as a Central Provincial Minister for Sports, Youth Affairs, Women's Affairs and Rural Industries Development.
If Hirunika can fight for Bharata and if Duminda can fight for Bertie, Pramita Bandara Tennakoon can fight for Janaka Bandara Tennakoon. Can the SLFP form a government while cutting off its branches?
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe left the island today on an official visit to India.
The Prime Minister is to hold bilateral talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his visit. The Prime Minister's office added that Premier Wickremesinghe would meet with senior Indian ministers and the leader of the Congress party, Sonia Gandhi. A delegation of senior officials, including Minister of Disaster Management, Anupriya Dashanayapa, and Minister of Development Strategies and International Trade, Malik Samaravikrama, is accompanying the Prime Minister on this visit.
Minister Chandima Veerakodi says President Maithripala Sirisena instructed the Cabinet of Ministers to act in line with the promise made by the Prime Minister to trade unions with regard to the Trincomalee oil tank farm. Sipetco trade unions halted the strike action initiated yesterday following a written assurance from the Prime Minister.
A letter addressed by the Secretary to the Prime Minister on his behalf to the petroleum trade unions notes that only a political understanding will be reached during the Prime Minister's visit to India regarding various development projects. The letter assures that legally binding agreements will be entered into only after informing the trade unions and the relevant stakeholders. Sipetco trade unions initiated yesterday's strike on the premise that efforts were being made to sell the Trincomalee oil tank farm to an Indian oil company. The 102 oil tanks located in close proximity to the deep water port in Trincomalee were constructed by the British in 1930. As per an agreement between the government and the Lanka Indian Oil Corporation in 2003, 99 tanks were leased to Lanka IOC at $100,000 per annum. As per the preliminary agreement, a proper lease agreement was to be reached within 6 months.
In 2003, it was given to India on a 35-year lease by the UNP government. Not only that, in the 15 years since 2003, 4 successive governments, the UNP government in 2003, the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime from 2005 to 2010, the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime from 2010 to 2015, and the Chandrika Bandaranaike government from 2004 to 2005 had obtained $100,000 per annum as per this agreement.
All 102 oil tanks are with the Indian Oil Corporation. The land is what is important. As the minister, I raised the argument that the land belongs to the state, and as such, any property on that land also belongs to the state. So when it comes to state property, we cannot just give it over to another company on a lease basis. As such, the agreement was legal. This was the argument over the past 10 years.
Discussions have been held to allocate 10 tanks for Sipetco. IOC will receive 14 and Sipetco will receive 10. With regard to the balance 74 tanks, an agreement will be reached between the Indian and Sri Lankan governments to form a joint venture. This is what the Honourable Minister had discussed.
If this agreement is signed, then within a short period of time, IOC will monopolize the oil trade in Sri Lanka. They will be able to provide fuel at a loss for a short time. If they do so, all of our consumers will go there. This cannot be stopped. They are not doing this now because they do not have a fuel unloading or distribution center of their own. Since they know the China Bay Agreement is not in force, they are trying to enforce it.
The agreement, which they have labelled as bad and inoperational, was signed in October 2003. It was invalid in 6 months, following which the United National Front was dissolved and Chandrika formed her government. Then Mahinda came into power. None of these unions said back then that this was illegal and that oil cannot be stored here. They did not open their mouths to say that IOC must be removed and that this must be provided to Sipetco.
There is a possible solution. Both parties have shares in CPSTL. The oil needs to be stored. Let us lease it to CPSTL. They can use 1/3 of it if they wish. Sipetco can take 2/3 of the entire stock, but it is on a leasehold. Today, Sipetco can only store oil for 42 days. If we acquire that, oil can be stored for 4 months as a buffer stock. We must do this.
The President said very clearly at the Cabinet meeting today that political understandings reached during the visit to India must not violate the promises made to the trade unions. So will we continue to lease this at $100,000 each and develop it so it is more advantageous to Sri Lanka? We are not in favour of writing this off to any country.
The Prime Minister is not visiting India to take steps on this. As far as I am aware, the Prime Minister is going to discuss the ICTA agreement. Any decisions regarding the oil tanks will be made following extensive discussions with the relevant parties.
Also in local news, Vasanta Samarasinghe shared these views during a media briefing held today.
The question we have is whether the Prime Minister suddenly went to India to cut a cake or to bake a cake. If he wanted to meet Prime Minister Modi, he could have waited until he comes to Sri Lanka on the 10th. Our suspicion, and what I think, is that he went there to deliver the recipe of the cake that will be cut by Prime Minister Modi. Will it be a slice of China Bay? Will it be a slice of the Eastern Terminal at the Colombo port? Will it be a slice of the LNG power plant project? Will it be several companies? They are preparing the recipe for the cake that Prime Minister Modi will cut on the 11th. You were not given the right to sell these resources of the country. National resources belong to the people. So before Modi visits the country, they must reveal what was discussed and what was done during the visit and what is to be done. We wish to reiterate that if they are trying to strike deals in secret and prepare a recipe for a tasty cake for Prime Minister Modi, the working people of this country will not allow it.
The collective of national organizations convened a media briefing today.
We thought that the strike action launched by the petroleum employees was one that would bring fruitful results to the country. It is clear that it was not so. This was a play. The script was by Anukumara Disanayaka and it was produced by Ranil Wickramasinghe.
The Federation of Self-Employed alleges that politicians have stolen the May Day from the hands of the working class.
Members of the Federation visited the Human Rights Commission today. Since independence, political parties preyed on the workers and started having parades, rallies and other events. This must be stopped. They provide drugs and alcohol to the addicts, food, vehicles and other items to draw people for these events. Workers' Day is held for them. The worker is at home on May Day. May Day is our day. Tell them to go to the temple on that day and give us our day.
Staff transfers made by former Governor of the Central Bank, Arjuna Mahendran, were discussed extensively at the Presidential Commission today. Newsfirst Zulfiq Fazan reports.
In her evidence, Kalyani Gunatilaka, the former director of the Human Resources Department of the Central Bank, said the former governor wanted to reshuffle the heads of departments. She said former Governor Mahendra did not elaborate on the reasons for the 14 transfers and said she was shocked over the number as it was very unusual. When the matter of the transfer list was raised before the Commission today, Counsel Chanaka De Silva objected to the relevance of this evidence. However, the attorney for the Attorney General's Department noted that these transfers were done with an objective of interfering in the decision-making process. Furthermore, the AG's department noted that this was an attempt to manipulate the system in order to manipulate the markets. Kalyani Gunatilaka informed the Commission she was particularly concerned about the transfer of Deepa Senimiratna from the Currency Department to the Public Debt Department because she was an excellent employee. Kalyani Gunatilaka said she did not possess the professional expertise to head the PDD. She went on to note that days after the transfers, the duties of deputy governors and assistant governors were reallocated. She added that a docket of HR information and an organization structure were given to the former governor upon his request. She stated that this docket was not produced before the Commission because it had not been requested by the Attorney General's Department. Former Assistant Governor C.A.B. Karunathilaka, giving evidence this evening, said he believed that Arjuna Mahendran may have been misinformed about the HOD competencies. He was also grilled on the tender board meeting that took place on the 27th of February 2015. He said that though he was not actively involved in the decision-making process, there was a high level of disagreement over the former governor's decision to accept 10 times of the amount offered on that day. In his evidence, Karunathilaka said before the Commission that there were concerns among the senior management of attempts to bring in consultants for the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. He also went on to note that the senior management was not pleased with the actions of former Governor Arjuna Mahendran. The tenure of the Commission was due to conclude on the 27th of April. Sources close to the Commission said that a letter had been sent to the President requesting for an extension of the tenure, but it is yet to receive a response. Sources say that they expect a positive response.
Former Chief Minister of the Western Province MP Prasanna Ranatunga convened a media briefing today to respond to allegations levelled at him.
There are plenty of MPs and ministers who park their vehicles in this way. I came here when I was the Chief Minister when I used state vehicles. I parked those vehicles at this location. Yesterday, it was said that I took steps to evict 28 people from a state-owned property and provide that property to another individual. There isn't even a case against me on this. That case was filed prior to the previous general election over a personal transaction. I have obtained legal advice on this and am acting accordingly. I run a filling station and sell land after breaking it up into plots. Is there something wrong with that?
But on the audio recording that was released, you are heard asking for money when you were the Chief Minister.
No, I beg your pardon, but that too is false. That is why I say that since there is an ongoing case, I do not wish to comment on this as it will influence the evidence. That is why I said I have taken legal resource. You will become aware of this in the future.
නිල්ධාරීට මැනපේවා අපි හඬපට ඇහුවා. ඉතින් මං කියන්නේ හඬපට අහනවා නම් දැන් මිනිස්සු හැම ගහන්න ඔබතුමා කතා කරන ඔබතුමා හිටපු මහමැතිවරේ.
Former Chief Minister, we cannot comprehend how you can threaten people like this. You threatened the police too.
In 88 and 91, I did much more than that in order to save the people. When Chanduka Kumaratunga was not given a nomination, on that day too I beat the police. At times we become radical in that way.
So you are a thug?
Have I been involved in any thuggery in the recent past?
In response to a request we made yesterday, a large number of people have submitted information on the actions of the former Chief Minister. We extend our gratitude to you. However, we have made a policy decision not to broadcast this information.
Developing countries were in for a rude shock when US President Donald Trump announced during the run-up to the presidential polls that he intends to drastically cut US aid to developing countries. According to a report by US-based website Foreign Policy, an internal State Department document has shed light on plans to slash US assistance to developing countries, including Sri Lanka.
US foreign aid seems to be the biggest casualty of President Donald Trump's first budget. According to media reports, Trump's proposed budget for 2018, the USAID's Economic Support Fund allocation to Sri Lanka will be cut by 100%. Newsfirst is awaiting a clarification from the US Embassy in Colombo on what the Economic Support Fund to Sri Lanka entails and if a 100% cut, as reported in its foreign policy website, would end US economic development assistance to Sri Lanka. In 2016, USAID disbursed assistance to Sri Lanka to the value of $24 million.
The regional meeting of young parliamentarians of Asia Pacific began in Colombo today. 39 countries are represented. The conference will address the role of young parliamentarians in advancing inclusive and peaceful societies and preventing violent extremism.
The meeting is being organized by the Parliament of Sri Lanka, the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the UNDP. A number of distinguished guests, including the President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Sabar Chowdhury, were present at the occasion.
The role of Parliament, this is became critical during the last Parliament and before, when it was felt that the executive was taking on too much of power, that even traditionally the role of the backbenchers of the government was being reduced. As a result of which, we are looking at means of paying back a huge debt that had been borrowed in the last 5 years. Therefore, our first decision was to introduce oversight committees into Parliament and to strengthen public finance. And we introduced a third committee, the Committee on Public Finance. And with that, we are now drafting a bill to establish a separate parliamentary budgetary office. It means that young parliamentarians have a role to play and senior members in the opposition have a role to play. Government is not confined just to a handful of members who are ministers and deputy ministers. It has to be the training ground.
A core objective of this conference is to encourage, through working groups on specific issues relating to violent extremism, is for young parliamentarians to interact with youth representatives, members of civil society organizations, and experts from various international organizations to share experience and expertise in the relevant field.
Over the last 3 decades across Asia and the region, Asia and the Pacific, there is the emergence of a vibrant and independent civil society that's been featured as part of this unprecedented growth of the region. It's opened up opportunities for young women and men to engage and make their voices heard. But paradoxically, as the speaker was saying, the lack of interest of young people in the formal power structures is something that is a great worry.
President Maithripala Sirisena has ordered officials to pay the promised 3-month-long monthly payment of 50,000 rupees to those affected by the Mithotumula tragedy as a lump sum.
The Presidential Media Unit noted that the decision was reached in order to overcome initial payments required to obtain temporary housing. President Maithripala Sirisena issued these instructions during a meeting held at the Presidential Secretariat today with regard to waste management in Colombo and its suburbs. The President also called on local government bodies to submit their plans on waste management and also called for a meeting with the Assistant Commissioners of all provinces. Houses were provided today for 68 people who lost their homes in Mithotumula.
A.V.S. Pereira, K.A. Nalin Darshana,
Minister Sajid Premadasa convened a media briefing today.
The Urban Development Authority is carrying out the task of providing houses to those who lost their homes in the Meetotamulla disaster. The ministry has two primary tasks. Earlier, title deeds were given following an estimate of the land that was lost. But today we have given title deeds without looking into any of that. Some may ask, why is a title deed given to a disaster-prone land? That is valuable because it can be used to locate an alternate land. Secondly, the loans of all those houses located in the high-risk zone classified by the NBRO will be waived off.
Parliamentarian Vidura Wickramanayake made the following statement regarding the Meetotamulla disaster.
Persons who must enforce law have violated it. They have moved the garbage dump to where the people live. Innocent children were buried alive. All these people must be held accountable for manslaughter. There are laws, but they are not enforced. Wherever there is an issue, we will pursue it. But we forget it very quickly. In another 3 months, no one will remember the Meetotamulla disaster. This country does not need politicians who lie.
During a media briefing held today, Dr. Wickramabahu Karunaratne expressed these views.
Who moved the garbage dump to that location? It was Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He suppressed the voice of the people in the process. He moved a garbage dump into Colombo, where the poor people live. Is this not a crime? Who moves a garbage dump to where people live? They dump the waste of the rich onto the poor. Even after this government came into power, matters against it were sabotaged.
Waste management in the Western Province was debated during the sitting of the Provincial Council today.
What the central government should have done is formulate the necessary policy and delegate the task to the relevant authorities. However, due to corruption, fraud and unwarranted political interference and due to the lack of a proper policy, the task of waste management ended in a catastrophe. I propose to this provincial council that given the delay already experienced, we must at least now pressure the government to formulating the necessary policies to improve waste management. I was able to evacuate 8 families comprising 35 people in the high-risk zone 3 days before the disaster. I am saddened by the loss of 32 people from my hometown. I called on the Chief Minister at his residence 3 to 4 days before the tragedy and spoke to him about this. I took the families from the Commissioner's office and I called him and said that they needed funds. He immediately called the Commissioner and said, immediately evacuate these families. We forcefully took this step. This was a disaster that we knew was in the offing. Because of your intervention, the lives of 40 people from 6 families were saved. Meetings are being held under the patronage of the Honourable Ministers. The talks have stagnated at these meetings. The ministers responsible for seeing to the failure of the projects initiated by the Provincial Council are going to these meetings and making statements in violation of the Constitution. Honourable Chairman, a government can formulate policy when it comes to waste management or any other subject, but they cannot form separate authorities to implement waste management as per the Constitution. This is a joke. The first question is, who is truly responsible for this garbage dump? Second, who is truly responsible for the problem of waste management? Who should be searching for solutions to this? There is a massive question mark hanging over the heads of the people. However, in the end, every citizen must take accountability for this waste. It is essential that we make the people aware that every piece of paper and polythene they accumulate, every toffee wrapper and every cigarette butt ends up here.
A tense situation arose at the Eastern Provincial Council today due to a demonstration conducted by a group of unemployed graduates.
A group of unemployed graduates of the Trincomalee district who are engaging in a hunger strike commenced a demonstration opposite the Eastern Provincial Council while the monthly meeting of the Provincial Council was underway. The unemployed graduates demonstrated while blocking the entrance of the Provincial Council, which disrupted activities at the council. An hour after the demonstration commenced, the Trincomalee police presented a court order to the demonstrators. This group of undergraduates have been engaged in a Satyagraha campaign for a period of 2 months, demanding for jobs.
The Chief Minister and others who stated that solutions will be provided in 2 weeks are now conducting meetings in air-conditioned rooms. But we are yet to receive solutions for our problems. Don't present court orders as solutions because we are not dealing with courts, the police or the army.
Later, with the intervention of the police, a group of demonstrators were granted the opportunity to meet the Chief Minister. Minister of the Eastern Province, Aryavati Galapati, who was angered by the obstruction caused by the demonstration, interrupted the meeting. The demonstrators left the premises with the Chief Minister of the Eastern Province notifying that applications will be called for vacancies once approved by the Management Services Department. With over 15 years of experience in the education sector in the province, this is what the Chief Minister of the Central Province had to say on the 31st of last month regarding the collapse of a building at the Sirimal Watta Mahavidyalaya in Wattegama on the 29th of March, which resulted in 22 students sustaining injuries.
Generally, you would conduct an investigation into the collapse of a building which was constructed in the past 2 to 3 years. This is an old building. Instead of carrying out investigations, we should be noting down observations into the incident. We have done this and have noted certain matters that we were previously not aware of.
In the backdrop of the Chief Minister's statement that an investigation was not required, the debris from this collapse should have at least been removed before the commencement of the new school term. From the visual captured by Action TV cameras this evening, it is evident that plans are afoot to get the students of the school to clear the debris when the new school term starts tomorrow. It must be noted that most of the buildings at this school were constructed over 50 years ago. It must also be highlighted that the provincial education officials are playing with the mental health of the students of this school by allowing the remnants of a dreadful incident to remain on site at the beginning of the new school term. A similar state of affairs can be seen in the form of 2 death traps at St. Mary's College in Pitipana, Nigambo. The recommendations from structural engineers in 2012 and 2015 state that these 2 buildings, which house 12 classrooms in total, should be demolished due to the poor state of each of them. It has been 9 months since the principal of this school informed the zonal education director of the state of these 2 buildings as a last resort after several attempts were made to notify the relevant school authorities of the impending disaster. The theme of this letter was the securing of the right to live. Western zonal educational officials have paid scant attention to the state of these 2 buildings, which are surrounded by several other school buildings and are exposed to the sea breeze. In 2002, steps were taken to construct a new building at the school, but these plans were later neglected.
This is a country that has seen disasters and catastrophes. This is nothing new. The education sector is something that apparently has received a lot of attention and a lot of funding. If that is the case, aren't the children of the fishing community that attend this school also important?
Should not the education officials of the Western Province take steps to arrest the impending disaster that is waiting to happen at St. Mary's College in Pitipana, Nigambo, instead of turning a blind eye for the moment and then shedding crocodile tears when something does happen? Having made the authorities aware, they will be legally culpable if this issue is not resolved. Minister of Disaster Management, this is over to you.
This is just like if a person is drowning, he has to depend on even a little piece of straw that is floating on the water in order to get back to the bank. So we are in that situation today.
Is the country in an economic crisis?
Anyone who has a little knowledge of economics will conclude that we are in a crisis.
And with that, we wrap up tonight's edition of Primetime News. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Arundhati Mutanayaka.
And I'm Shrin Silva. Take care and good night.